NFL draft expert Kyle Krabs from Locked On NFL Draft is joining us. What's up, Kyle? Busy weekend? Get into anything fun?
Yeah, we had a couple picks that we had to pay attention to, and a couple hours, just watching 259 selections from all 32 teams. But it's a blast, and we love it every year. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as well.
Kyle, how deep did you go on any of your mocks?
The furthest I went, I did a 2-3 round mocks. Okay. So, you'll hop on one of these draft simulators and you can pick a team and do 7-round mocks. So you do 7-round scenarios for teams, trying to get to know just how deep the needs go and kind of get an idea for all the different combinations if you prioritize position or X or Y early on. But as far as actually projecting the first or every pick, it was 3 rounds, and I didn't have the stomach to do the 7-rounders like some of the guys did.
Yeah, I don't know how I think it's an exercise in insanity. Yeah, I really do. Based on the 3 rounds that you went, how do you feel things played out in reality versus how you predicted they would play out?
Yeah, I think you saw the vast majority of talent that went was the talent that I would have expected to go. I think on Joe Marino and I, for Locked On NFL Scouting, we did a final predictive board, and 84 of our 100 actually went in the top 100. So I would say that's relatively, I don't want to say chalk, but a lot of what you expected as far as the talent itself. Now, Cleveland was one of the beneficiaries of a couple of players that did end up sliding a little bit, with Siaki Ika, who fell all the way to 98. Dawand Jones, obviously, at 111, who you guys were talking about coming in with the decision with him long-term and how he develops. And Luke Whippler from Ohio State was another one that we thought had a pretty good chance to be a day 2 selection as an early entry as well. So not too many crazy surprises. I think a lot of people were surprised to see Darnell Washington, the Georgia tight end, fall as far as he did. Sounds like the medicals were pretty ugly in that regard. But that's the part that's really hard on our end of things, is not getting a chance to have access to all the information the teams do. So you have to just trust whatever caused that slide. There was something legitimate because all 32 teams continued to pass.
Did you have what's the thing that shocked you the most about the draft?
Man, I was really surprised how many, and it's Cleveland's included in this, but it's not a big picture early round discussion, but just how many quarterbacks were drafted. I think a lot of these teams saw Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, and said, hey, why don't we roll the dice and draft some guy that has fringe or lower level tiers. But I actually think that the quarterback that Cleveland got, DTR, was my favorite day 3 quarterback just for the athleticism that he has. And I got a chance to meet him over the summer last year and really enjoyed his leadership style and talking about the game with him. So I think he's a really nice developmental type for Cleveland, especially to play behind Deshaun Watson with some of the parallels in their athleticism and ability to make things happen on the move. So just the raw number of quarterbacks that I never would have guessed were 4th, 5th, 6th round picks. And these teams were kind of jumping at the opportunity to roll the dice and take a developmental quarterback early, while there was still some really good scheme-specific type of talent or developmental type talent at other positions that maybe had a more statistically likely probability of you hitting on it and getting a nice player that can contribute for your team.
Kyle, Jay talked about it earlier, and I was pointing it out last year. The Browns, they do have some guys, some veterans, Sione Takitaki. You got guys like JLK who's back, Phillips is back, and guys in the middle like Anthony Walker, but no linebacker. Was that a function of the Browns may not have liked any of the linebackers starting in the 3rd round, moving back to the 7th or whatever the case may be, or do you feel like it was a shallow linebacker draft in general for a lot of people?
Yeah, so I'm just kind of pulling up my sheet here to look. I think that the tone was set really early with Jack Campbell, which last time I was on with you guys, I gave you the idea to maybe go up and trade for Jack Campbell, and sorry for that advice because he went at 18.
Right,
and that was
crazy.
never going to happen. But then after that, you had to wait till 67, where Drew Sanders was the next one off the board. So I think that gap, that separation between a guy that you felt like could play and deconstruct blocks, but also defend the run and rush the passer a little bit, and Jack Campbell versus all these other players that were more incomplete or skill-specific type players, I think it kind of bit Cleveland a little bit that the run for linebackers happened so late, where these guys kind of came off hot and heavy. You had 5 linebackers go between 67 and 91. And if Cleveland, obviously, they draft Cedric Tillman there in that stretch of picks, and I think that's a good selection. I think that he was probably a guy who I would have expected would have been gone a little bit earlier towards the back end of the second round. But once the run kind of happened, man, don't force it. There's other personnel opportunities for you that are going to be coming after June 1st when some of these guys get cut, or you get through training camp and guys are it's evident that they're going to be moved. So I appreciate them not forcing linebacker when that third round really seemed like it was the stretch of players that you felt guys, if they were going to contribute pretty early on, they all went in that stretch and picks. And I actually like the player that Cleveland got in Cedric Tillman a bit more than the vast majority of those guys.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, Kyle, was Tillman. Obviously, when you're starting out in the third round, it's going to limit what you can do in a draft. But my immediate thought was a big target in the red zone, a guy who can go high point the ball on fade routes, and something that they really didn't have last year. Just your thoughts on Tillman and how he fits with the Browns, and if he can get on the field right away.
I think he can. I think he's more dynamic than David Bell, and I like David Bell coming out of Purdue quite a bit, who they got last year. But Tillman, I thought, was the better Tennessee wide receiver. I think he's more well-rounded. I think he's more physical than Jalen Hyatt. I think Jalen Hyatt's a little bit more of a one-dimensional, vertical down the field, 9-ball type of player, versus Tillman. I think working comeback routes that work back down towards the sideline, the ball skills along the perimeter, the ability to high point the football and play with physicality. He just had a quiet year this past year, and I know he dealt with an injury throughout the course of the season, so you missed some playing time there, and out of sight, out of mind versus some of these other receivers, and a couple of the guys that ended up going in front of him, and Nathaniel Dell and Rashee Rice and Jaden Reed, Jonathan Mingo. Those guys were round 2 selections. They were all players who had a chance to go down to the Senior Bowl, and you get an extra data point for them to look at there versus Tillman being somebody who was kind of off the beaten path this year when Tennessee's offense exploded. So I think this is a potential to be a really nice kind of value pick for Cleveland, and I think Cleveland has a number of guys that can be candidates in that regard. But Tillman was a player I like quite a bit.
All right, let's do grades, and we'll start with the Browns, and then we'll go through the other AFC North teams. What do you give the Browns, Kyle, considering that they didn't have a lot of draft capital up top, and they traded away that last pick, their 7th round pick? But what damage did they do in 3 through 6?
Yeah, so the Dawand Jones, Isaac McGuire, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Cameron Mitchell, Luke Whippler stretch is a really good day 3 haul. So I'd give their day 3 picks an A. As far as the big picture, while acknowledging you don't have a 1, you don't have a 2, it's a class for me that's probably a solid B+, but it's hard to buy all the way in just because of the lack of those slam dunk prospects that don't have the questions. And I think Whippler is probably a little bit of functional strength questions. Dawand Jones seemed like he rubbed the teams the wrong way. Whether or not that actually ends up being a problem or not, that's going to be up to him and how Cleveland is able to get them into their program.
What do you mean by that? Elaborate on that. Rub teams the wrong way.
So I know Dawand went down to the Senior Bowl and did one day of practice and then packed it in for the rest of the week. And it just felt like that was something that teams kind of raised an eyebrow at, that he passed on so much of he was passive throughout a lot of the process. And they want to see you take those opportunities to compete, to test, to check boxes for them. And he took the opportunity to go down there. He had a really good first day, and then he spent the rest of the week in street clothes and didn't partake, and he didn't give you the full participation in the pre-draft process from an athletic profile testing perspective. So just it felt like, and I'm trying to extrapolate and read between the lines, it felt like teams were a little hesitant based on his strategy in the pre-draft process. Whether that's justified or not, again, that's up to Dawand. But I thought from a talent perspective, he was a top 50 talent.
Did he explain why he was passive and why he pulled out of some of those events that typically guys have to go through?
I'm sure he was asked about it in the interviews. I don't believe there was any public discussion that was held in that regard, and that might have been part of it too. Whatever, when he was asked directly by the teams in the interviews, if they did ask him, and whatever he offered to them for context may have contributed to that too. But I never in a million years would have guessed he would have fell out of the first 2 days of the draft.
All right, well, we'll take that as a nice value pick there. Hopefully he doesn't turn into a personality, a difficult personality to coach. If that was his reputation at Ohio State, I never heard anything about that.
No.
At Ohio State. So, I mean, obviously, like you said, teams
A lot of times
have access to all that information.
Those
we
guys
don't.
are going off advice from
the
agents.
Right.
And
Yep.
And it's really not more than that.
Yeah.
They're listening to the people telling them what to do.
Yeah, and obviously sometimes that's not wise advice.
Well, right.
When you pull yourself out of that process, it does send a certain message. And whatever the reason may be, whatever reasons he gave, I'm sure in his mind they were valid, but clearly that presented issues. I hadn't heard that, Kyle, but that makes perfect sense now as to why he slipped as far as he did.
Yeah, and he was a player who, probably the mock drafts projected a little bit higher. But you also think about Orlando Brown Jr., who went through the pre-draft process and tested the combine and put up like an all-time stinker combine performance, and he went from the first round to the third round. So that's probably part of the discussion as a player who's of similar stature. Like, look, let's not give him any reason to start poking holes, but when the alternative is to don't do it, then teams kind of get leery of, okay, what is he and his team potentially trying to avoid us having access or having information on that would alarm us to who he is. So it's you guys make a great point. Every camp has their own unique strategies on how to handle this pre-draft process with how valid or invalid they feel the information and the data points are or are not. But for Dawand, it's not a talent issue. I will say that. So we'll just have to see how well he hits the ground running with his time in Cleveland.
We talked about, we haven't really discussed the other teams in the AFC North. But man, the Ravens and the Steelers, I like the pick of Darnell Washington. Maybe you alluded to something in terms of his medical that could have dropped him a little bit further. Maybe you could elaborate on that. And then also Zay Flowers to the Baltimore Ravens. They got Odell Beckham Jr., they get Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson is back in the mix. What did you think about those two moves for the Steelers as well as the Ravens?
Yeah, well, from Washington's perspective, this was the most physically unique of the tight ends in the class, and we had a crazy amount of tight ends go. I mean, more tight ends in this class than any year in recent memory for me. I think Washington was a really good value pick for Pittsburgh. I would have guessed he'd have been a top 50 pick as a floor. They got him at 93. It sounded like there was something with either a knee or a foot with him that had some teams concerned about medicals. I know there had been some commentary about weight fluctuation during his time at Georgia as well. And he's a big guy. He's 6'7", 260, 270 pounds. So for Washington, if the lower body medicals on a big-bodied frame like that is probably there's some longevity questions. But if Pittsburgh gets one contract out of him, they get 5-6 years. I mean, it's going to be a good return on investment with the 93rd overall pick in the draft for what he's physically capable of bringing to the table. I thought that was their best value pick, but I really, really like that Pittsburgh class as a whole. As far as Baltimore, not quite having as much draft capital to work with, but Zay Flowers in that selection, they're not really leaning any more into, well, Lamar has to play in a run-heavy offense, and we're going to do all the heavy tight end stuff. I mean, they're really leaning into, and obviously they paid him $52 million a season, so they'd be smart to do it and try and unlock every bit of potential that he has as a passer. They're really going the opposite direction of what that offense has been the last couple of years, and whether or not it all clicks together and works is going to be the big science experiment and chemistry experiment for the Ravens as far as what that offense ends up looking like.
So what are your grades? Let's start with the Ravens, then we'll go Steelers and Bengals to finish it up. What
I think the Ravens, they were handcuffed a little bit by lack of draft capital, too. They obviously gave the 2 for Roquan Smith, gave him a big contract. I like their value on day 3 as well. Tavius Robinson, big body pass rusher. I really think they need more pass rush help there. Caillou Blue-Kelly in the 5th round at 157 is a player that if you told me he would have been their pick at 86, I wouldn't have batted an eye. I think that was a really good value for them, and especially with Marcus Peters not re-signed. I mean, he has a potential to step in there and take some pretty meaningful snaps. So Zay Flowers, Caillou Blue-Kelly, I'd give that draft class a B. I'm a little leery about Trenton Simpson as a stack linebacker. It feels like he might be the heir to Patrick Queen, who they are kind of facing a fifth-year option decision with. And he didn't do too well in stack linebacker situations. He was more of a hybrid player when he was at his most successful. So I'll need to see what the plan is for that. But I give the Ravens a B. Pittsburgh, I'd give an A. Broderick Jones, Joey Porter, Junior Cano, Benton, Darnell Washington, those first 4 picks, there is a consistent theme with those guys that they are prototypical size. They are big-time physical players. They are very much leaning into that MO of Steelers football. And I know that's an eye-rolling cliche to bring up, but with those 4 dudes that they brought in, I think they're great scheme fits. They got good value with Porter. He could have been their pick at 14. And Darnell Washington, I think, was a steal on day 2 as well.
Yeah, I know you say it's eye-rolling, but trust me, being in Cleveland, it's a thing. You want your team to have a point on the horizon. Like, who are you? What are you about? And while we've been asking that question relentlessly over the last 30 years with what this organization is and where they're going, other than a million different directions, with the Steelers, and I'm glad you brought that up, they know who they want. They always want and they always get dogs. They get guys that want to rip your head off. And one of the things that we talked about last year was this Browns team had no dogs. They had no fight in them at all. And then you play a Steelers team that you think you have more talent than, and you lose to them because they have more want to. Mm-hmm. And I think you nail it. They went out to Pittsburgh, went out and did it again. They find a bunch of guys that once their name is called, and you're like, of course the Steelers took him. That's exactly where that player belonged.
Yeah, absolutely. And Broderick Jones, they did a great job to go up in front of the Jets and get him too. It sounded like the Jets had him dialed in as their target after the trade down with the pick swap. So the fact that they got aggressive, they gave up 120 to go up and get him and lock him in, and they still got those other 3 dudes. And Corey Trice in the 7th round is a guy who fell because of medicals as well, as far as concerns about, I think, another lower body injury there. But he ended up having a really good pre-draft process and is another prototypical length guy. So Porter and Trice as big, long corners, kind of that's been the MO in Pittsburgh too, is these physical long corners. And I think obviously as with the legacy pick of Porter and is the family lineage there, they have to feel really good about what they accomplished. And now it's just a matter of how quickly those guys can round into form and be the best versions of themselves.
Well, let's wrap it up with the Bengals grade. They're the team that everybody in this division is chasing. Did the gap between the Bengals and everybody else widen, or did the other teams sort of play a little catch-up here?
So I like their first 2 picks in Myles Murphy and DJ Turner, but I will say I feel like a lot of Cincinnati's draft mirrored what it was last year, in which it felt like they were drafting in advance of needs. And, when they're getting ready to pay Joe Burrow what they're going to end up paying Joe Burrow, and they get ready to pay Jamar Chase what they're getting ready to pay Jamar Chase, I get it. You're going to have to make some financial decisions. And having those guys in the pipeline and in the system and having a year of experience or 2 years of experience before they're stepping into critical roles, it's a good way to create this sustainability as you're giving out these big contracts and you have to let guys go. Maybe it's a guy like Sam Hubbard ends up being the guy they move on. Maybe it's Trey Hendrickson they end up moving on from. But Myles Murphy, these feel like pipeline picks more than they feel like immediate return on investment picks. Now, they'll play rotationally. But DJ Turner, as long as Chidobe Awuzie is healthy, I don't think he's in the starting lineup. Myles Murphy, I don't think he's in the starting lineup. So they got deeper. I don't know that they really accomplished improving their starting lineup so much as they tried to give themselves flexibility. And I like that strategy for them, but it's just a matter of I don't know how many more snaps they're going to get out of those guys versus some of these other draft classes where guys are going to step into definitive roles that the teams had the need to fill.
Very good. So overall, the division did very well. You'd say the Steelers of the 4 won the draft. The Browns probably came in second?
I would say so. Yeah, I think the Browns, especially when you grade on the curve of where they started making their picks versus Cincinnati. I like the talent that Cincinnati got more than the talent on the whole of what Baltimore got. And Myles Murphy and DJ Turner are really big needle movers that I would give them the nod over, or at least Myles Murphy the nod over any individual player that the Browns got, but they picked him at 28. Cleveland didn't pick till later, and I think that their day 3 value really help bridge the gap. So I'd put the Browns probably second on this divisional list behind the Steelers.
Last thing before we let you go. Who won the draft? Which team in your mind had the best draft and proved their team the most?
I really liked a couple of teams what Detroit did. I understand there was some discussion about their early selections and drafting a linebacker and a running back and a tight end at 34, and then they draft a safety at 45. But I think they were head and shoulders some of the best players at their respective positions. Now, Gibbs was obviously behind Bijan Robinson, who was off the board when they picked, but that as an upgrade over DeAndre Swift, I think is a huge potential upgrade because DeAndre Swift just really hasn't lived up to that potential. So the Detroit Lions had 4 picks in the top 50. So when you get that kind of volume, it's going to be really easy to get a class that everybody likes. Another draft class that I really, really liked was Philadelphia's as well with Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, and then Sidney Brown in the 3rd round was a player who I thought was a really good steal for them. And then Keely Ringo from Georgia, the corner in the first couple of picks of the 4th round. They traded up to get him. So I'd give Howie Roseman a tip of the hat here, too, for what he was able to do.